This is the Page Publishing Book Club. I'm your host, Alice Stockton Rossini. Dancing in the studio with my engineer, Rob Barretts. How you doing, Robert? I love this song. I love this song. Walk the Walk. It's the name of this song. Chevy Lopez is the name of the band. Google Chevy Lopez. You'll see what I'm talking about. Okay, we are going to get right down to it tonight with a book about the Quran. Now, I don't know, Rob, would you agree that most people don't know anything about the Quran? They don't know what's in it. They don't know what it's really about. And at a time when Muslim radicals seem intent on terrorizing the world, maybe it's a good time for a book that will help us all better understand the Quran. And it's why Zeglul Qaeda wrote Reflections on the Miracles of the Quran.
Well, the miracles of the Quran are stories that are told that no human being could possibly have known during that time. They cover a whole wide area of things. It's not necessarily scientific, even though there are a lot of scientific facts in it, but it extends to everyday's life. It extends to history and some historical figures. So the miracles are there to be seen anytime over the ages. And one of the miracles is that the Quran was, as promised, it will never be modified or changed. And that has been true for the past 1,500 years.
Well, I guess there's a lot of misconceptions about the Quran because these radical Muslims who invoke the Quran when they do outrageous things, that's got to be very frustrating for somebody like you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No different than the other extremist groups, whether be it Jews or Christians or Buddhists, the people who live on the fringe, and they go to the extremes because no religion, Islam included, ever promotes or allows the killing of innocent life. Not one. In fact, there are statements in the Quran that replicate what's actually said in the Old Testament, that the killing of a human being, an innocent person, is like killing the whole humanity. So people should distinguish between the action of the few and the basic teachings of not only the Quran and Islam, but the other faiths as well.
Yeah, I mean, how many times is there a horrific murder or a massacre and we get, God told me to do it? It just makes it so frustrating for people who know better. And, your book, it looks like you are really making an effort to help us understand what the Quran is really about.
Exactly. But a lot of people take those extremist politicians when they go and attack Islam. They know nothing about Islam. They never bother to read the Quran or even parts of it or even discuss it with any intelligent Muslim being. So it's easy to cover ignorance by attacking blindly a faith that is a continuation of the prior faith. In other words, if you read the book, it shows how that Islam is really a continuation of a process that began with the Judaism, going by the Christianity, ending with Islam. And while I was writing this book, actually, I showed some excerpts from it to other people who are considered to be quite knowledgeable about Islam, and they were surprised. They were shocked to see that the revelations are unbelievable. They just cover areas that often people read and without stopping to contemplate or think. So it goes. More Muslims were surprised than other people because they read the Quran continuously, but they don't stop to contemplate the meanings and the words.
Well, I think it's interesting on your synopsis here that I'm reading is that your ultimate objective is to link the Islamic faith to other religions to convey the message that what God wants is for us to be at peace with each other.
Absolutely. The message is the same. When I read about the Jew who reads the Old Testament and reads that all the human lives are sacred and cries over it as we do, when we see an innocent person being killed or mistreated even. And actually in the Quran and in this book, I mentioned that the Prophet Muhammad was told in the Quran that what has been revealed to you is not different from what was revealed before. Same message.
Let me just say, Zaghloul is an engineer by trade, and he's a layman, and he's just hoping that his book helps people understand what his religion is really all about. James Stoop was drafted into Vietnam right out of college in 1979, and because he was a pretty good writer, he got writing jobs and got out of combat. His book tells the story of what life was like off the battlefield, behind the scenes. It's called Behind the Wire. And James, you say by the time you got there, the war was winding down, right?
But I had only been there for 5 months, and you had to be there 7 months or longer to go home with the division. So I was transferred to the 1st Air Cavalry Division. Now, my book is about life in the rear as opposed to life on the front lines, almost like the MASH of Vietnam. It's a comedy drama. It shows the absurdity of the war. It shows how guys lived that didn't see combat. Because for every 2 guys in the field, there were 3 guys in the rear in support positions, admin, finance, medics. And it is the first book that I have read that completely chronicles the 365-day experience that was Vietnam. It was very much sex, drugs, rock and roll, and insubordination when I was there. 65% of the troops were high most of the time, mostly pot. Heroin became an epidemic by the time I left. The military broke down. The guys were refusing to go into the field. Behind the Wire is the title of the book. All base camps were surrounded by barbed wire. So if you were inside the base camp, you were pretty safe. If you were out in the field, you weren't. So unlike the myriad of combat books that have been written about Vietnam, this is a story about how guys lived that were in the base camps, that were secure, that didn't see combat. And basically, there was a subculture of anti-war, anti-establishment troops over there that basically did their own thing and got away with it. It was just an unbelievable scene. The camaraderie, the brotherhood of the troops that were over there that supported each other, whether they were in the field or not in the field. It was just an amazing, amazing experience. Having been a writer and collected all the writing materials and the letters that I had sent home, it impacted my life so much that I had to tell this story. And before I left, I sued the Army. I had a dissident lawyer advise me on if they ever hassled you and harassed you and started busting your balls, here's something you can do to get back at them within the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And the end of the book shows how I got together with 82 guys in my company, and we went after our captain and battalion commander because of the horrible conditions of food and sanitary and also just harassing us. So we actually sued the Army and won. The whole book tells this one amazing experience after another of things like this that went on behind the scenes. And I had to tell this story, and I had all these notes, and I started writing and making notes and planning the book. But as my profile says, life got in the way, so to speak. But I finally completed a first draft in 1994. And after I retired and moved to Florida, I went back in 2014 and did a complete rewrite of the book, able to maintain the integrity of the book and the story. And if I hadn't had all the notes, and if I hadn't written that first draft in 94, there's no way I would have remembered this stuff, especially in the kind of detail. People that read the book say they feel like they were there with me, and it's just something that I had to do. You know, it speaks a lot to the futility of that war and how it impacted people, but yet it tells a different side to the Vietnam War than the horror of combat and that particular aspect of things.
Okay, so like the MASH of the Vietnam War. James, you were so lucky you could write. And writers, did you hear what he said, my Page Publishing Book Club faithful? He felt compelled. That's a magic word. He felt compelled to write this book. And, you know, that's a really big part of the battle. Let's go to Point Pleasant, New Jersey. Why don't we? Right down the coast from our WOR studios. Patricia Ritchell lives in a short town, so it's no surprise you would write a book entitled Patsy the Seagull.
Well, as I said in the jacket of my book, I'm a self-proclaimed beach addict. I love every part of it. And I have since I was born when my parents took me down there.
Aw.
A few years ago, Patsy came up to me and I threw him a potato chip. And little by little, he would come. And he had a damaged leg that he probably caught in a fishing line. And I have a bad foot. And he would come up. And all of a sudden, after a while, he would take the potato chips right out of my hand. And I loved him. So I named him Patsy. And another friend of mine on the beach, her name is Pat, and she has bad foot too. So the three of us were like kindred spirits. So after I gave him only 6 potato chips, because I worried about his cholesterol, he would hop around, sit down with us, and stay for a couple minutes. And he'd nod his head up and down when I talked to him and all, and he'd fly away. And I volunteer and I teach health lessons in my granddaughter's school. So the kids would ask me every year, how's Patsy? Have you seen Patsy? And I'd say, yeah, and I'd tell them all about him and how he liked Cape Cod potato chips, and the kids just loved it. So when my grandchildren were in 3rd grade, the teachers came to me and said, listen, you've got to write a book about Patsy. And I looked at them and I said, I don't want to do that. They said, yes, you do. And you're going to have your granddaughter, who's a fantastic artist, illustrate it. Well, I love Patsy and I love my granddaughter. So I said, yeah, well, maybe. So I came home, thought about it, wrote the book, and that was it.
And your granddaughter did the illustrations?
Oh, yeah, she is so gifted. Didn't get it from me.
Oh, my gosh. And you just found Page Publishing?
Yes. It was just so weird, how I just, I sent it to somebody down here at the shore who was also a publisher, but he never got back to me. And I sent it to Page Publishing, and all of a sudden they accepted it. I couldn't believe it. And then I got a publisher's coordinator named Cammie Butler, who is absolutely amazing. I have learned so much about the publishing business, and it's been fascinating.
Like what?
Well, the whole process of it. The editing, and then the art editor gets it. And I have an author's portal on my website, and I didn't know how to get into it. So I called Cammie, and she walked me right through it, and it's been wonderful. She's amazing.
So what do we learn from Patsy the Seagull?
Well, Patsy the Seagull goes out to, gets caught with Sandy, the hurricane, and Patsy and his friend Harriet get caught in the winds, and it takes them west to Happiness Lake in Pennsylvania. And they hated it. And so they met Mr. and Mrs. Duck there, who were a little afraid of them because they're big. And they said, don't be afraid. Just look around you. So I had all the senses involved in a lake. They didn't like the fish because it wasn't salty, but they ate it anyway. But they loved the pine trees because they give off such a beautiful smell and they cleanse the air. And they missed the sand because they love to be in the warm sand. And the lake didn't have sand, but it did have warm grass. And the sound of the rippling, they missed the ocean sounds, but they liked the rippling of the little waves from the lake. And then they had to make a decision. Did they want to stay there or did they want to go back home? And then I say, well, readers, what do you think they did? And I asked my students about it. I said, do you think they should stay there or go home? Well, 90% of the students I asked said, no, they should go home. So they went back home and they had a party on the beach with the 2 grandma Pats with the bad foot.
Well, I would think you have a built-in audience for this book.
You mean the kids in school?
Yeah.
Because they all love the beach. Yeah.
Did they buy it?
I have sold so many copies of this book, I can't believe it. The teachers in the school where I volunteer, they all bought it. My relatives all bought it. My friends from around the world bought it. I mean, so many people bought it. But you know what's so funny? This past summer, I didn't see Patsy, and I'm afraid he went to seagull heaven.
Oh.
But the kids swear they see him. And one little girl that goes to art class with my granddaughter, she said, my class was in Hoboken by the water, and I swear I saw Patsy.
Patsy wanted to spend a day in the city,
Oh, a day in the... I was thinking that maybe that'll be
next
my third book.
Yeah. You should do it. You should do it.
Because I love New York.
You should do it. That would be hilarious. A seagull in
Well,
New
I
York.
did write a sequel. Did you know that?
No. Is it coming
And
out?
Page Publishing accepted it.
That's awesome. Okay, we got to take a quick break. Coming up, a look into our alien future, our world after it crashes and takes our electronics with it, and a trucker poet. Yes, trucker poet. Stay with us. This is the Page Publishing Book Club.
Attention all authors. Page Publishing is looking for authors. Have you written a book and want to get it published? Page Publishing will get your book into bookstores and for sale online at Amazon, Apple iTunes, and other outlets. They handle all aspects of the publishing process for you. Printing, cover art, publicity, copyright, and editing. Call 800-204-6099 now for your free author submission kit. That's 800-204-6099 for your free author submission kit.
Thanks so much for coming back to the Page Publishing Book Club. Look, Rob, look how many people came back to see us. I'm your host, Alice Stockton Rossini. IT guy by day, writing with a passion by night, inspired by Stephen Hawking, who answered the question, could mankind be invaded by aliens? With the answer, of course we could, and we will. Burton Lead took that and ran with it for his book entitled 2094. Burton, why 2094?
Because it's a year and an inflection point. It's when a lot of things come together. Now, I should tell you that that's a timeline that comes now to 2094 because I fill in the reader the history of the 21st century, and then we go on from there. It's the inflection point because it's the crises of the century. The climate crises, the economic crises, the social crises all come about this period of time when we actually make contact with aliens, not on the best of terms with alien contact. It's a very difficult one, and it's a contact with a civilization. It's got characters throughout it that take you from 2094 up into the middle of the 2200s, and that period of time is a period of great crisis for mankind and alien wars. It's about whether man can survive, does survive. How does mankind survive, if he does at all? And how do we overcome this crisis, the alien wars, the exploration of the exoplanets, the finding of who we are, because that's where it comes to in the end, finding who we are in this galaxy of ours. It's about mankind's time of self-discovery, not just on this planet, but in the galaxy as a whole. And it takes us from now to the middle of the 2200s. I promise a fun read, an entertaining read. That's why I will give my reader. This is what you need to know. There's a bunch of things. Yes, there's sci-fi, and there's the Heinleins and the Orwells and all of those people, but there's also the ancient classics. There's military history. There's political sci-fi like Orwell. And so it brings together a lot of different strains of sci-fi. So it's hard to pigeonhole in one kind of sci-fi or another. But it's almost written as if it were a historical novel, but in the future. How fun is that?
That's right. You're going to take this to the bank. Since if you won't be here in, 2094, here's what's going to happen. So before you die, you know.
Yes.
Yes.
The difficult part is how does mankind get through it? How do we overcome? How do we meet these challenges and overcome them? Because it's alien wars, it's planetary conquest, it's finding our species among other species in the galaxies, and how much like we are them and how much we're different. That's the amazing thing about the book.
All right, Burton, I believe you. Our next author also imagines our world in distress. William Crute wrote The Greenhouse Near Loveville. Now, the hardest question is the first one, William. What's your book about?
Well, that's the hardest question for me. I don't know about other writers. I guess it's 282 pages, and then I've got to squeeze it into one or two, three sentences, something like that.
Who's Morgan Armstrong?
Yeah, okay, he's the protagonist, and it's really broken into three parts. The first part has Morgan in his heyday, I guess it is. He's having a good time in life. He's middle-aged, I guess, on his third wife. And his reason for being is really to make money. And he's a little bit loose with his scruples. And but he's a guy that can say anything, do anything that he wants to, and can get away with it. So he plays hardball with somebody who probably shouldn't have played hardball with, and ends up being framed for murder and goes to prison, where he has to live a life he's not used to, where people tell him what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. But he learns a lot of things with that experience in prison, especially with the warden, who was a woman, and her name is Catherine. And his roommate or cellmate has been there 20 years and really hasn't spoken to anybody in 20 years. But Morgan is able to strike up a friendship with him, and that leads him into some really funny things and money-making things, actually, from prison. He was framed for murder, so eventually the person who actually did the murder confesses, and Morgan gets freed. And his third wife, in the meantime, while he's been in prison, has liquidated everything, all of his businesses, and taken it and lost it. So he's got 3 children, $1,500 in his pocket, and an old VW bus, and a cabin in the woods in the George Washington National Forest. So he has to start all over again with all of that sort of pressure on him, which turns out to be a good thing. The third part is the collapse of the United States in 8 days, which makes everybody sort of step back 1 or 2 steps, and have to start over. And that's very interesting, I think. The world somehow doesn't seem to be working right. And so this one makes it true for everyone, really. Maybe the wealthy have an advantage, but not much when everything's sort of no electricity, the grids go down. And actually, it kind of makes life better in that they have to learn how to do something and make something rather than just go to work and push some keys.
The United States falls apart in 8 days.
In 8 days, the whole government, everybody stands down. Everybody's gone. The Supreme Court, president. So you've got anarchy and chaos.
So that kind of puts everybody on a level playing field at that point.
That's right. That's somewhere in the description of this book. That's what I say. Everybody has to start over, and it levels the field as much as he can. Somebody like Donald Trump has still got $10 million or $10 billion or $4 billion, whatever it is. But still, he's got a lot of problems because the banks are gone, Wall Street's gone, just about everything's gone, and they're back in the 18th century.
You know what? That's like, during 9/11, we had no cell phone service, and there's a whole generation of kids, of people now who don't even remember what that was like. But when you couldn't you turned your computer on and there was no signal, you went to use your phone and you couldn't get through. Let me tell you, that does something to you. So
it does.
It's quite interesting that you put that concept forward again. Thank you, William. See? Not so bad, right? We have time for one more, right, Rob? All right. Poet and trucker. 2 words you don't normally find in the same sentence, right? Well, that's who Lance Figgins is. He's the author of Poetic Trucker, Broken Dreams. And Lance, you're talking to us from a storm somewhere in the Midwest right now, right? What are you going to do? Sit and write some poetry?
That's probably what I'm going to do. I'm going to do some editing on the book and maybe write some more.
Jeez. Now, did you just suddenly find poetry one day?
Absolutely. I hadn't written anything since creative writing in high school when I graduated in 1978. And been a trucker most of my life, and I just started writing, and I had a kind of a year of bad luck. And in the middle of this, I thought I was losing my marbles, and I talked to a friend that's a psychologist, and she told me to start writing this stuff down. So I started writing it down, and next thing I know, it's starting to rhyme, so now I think I'm going crazy. And I sent some of these poems to people that I know, and they all said the same thing: you've got to find a publisher. Okay. So I sent poems to different publishers, and Page was the one that made me the best deal.
How many poems?
There's 105 in my first book, and to date I've got 360 written. So the second book is done, the third book is done, and pretty good chunk of the fourth one done.
Jeez, that's a lot of poems. And you did that in a year?
Yeah. I started writing a year ago, September. And I had no intention of ever writing a book. That was the last thing on my list. And it looks like it moved to the top of the list pretty fast.
Did it help you deal with some of the stuff you were going through?
Yeah, it did. What happened is a 25-year marriage caved in. A month after that happened, my truck, I'm an owner-operator. I own that blue truck that's on the cover of that book. And the motor blew up. And a couple months after that, I had a heart attack. And a couple months after that, me and my ex tried to fix things, and that fell apart. And I met another girl, and that fell apart. And my ex came home and left again. Like I said, in a year, I had more bad luck than I had good luck.
But you keep on driving, don't you?
Oh, hey, the government needs my tax money, I guess.
I hear you. Wow, Lance. Well, I've heard that from a lot of people. People have written books, and they were inspired by tragedy. And, a shrink or friends or, said, hey, write it down. And next thing you know, you look what you got.
I've had friends tell me your poetry is absolutely fantastic. I've had a number of people say that they bought the book and they were just going to read a couple poems and then put it down. And 2 pots of coffee later and 180 pages, they quit because they ran out of book. That's happened a lot. I mean, I can send you, I'll bet, a dozen messages that people have told me that. A friend of mine said that after he bought my book. He said, for those of you who know Lance Figgins, this would be the last thing you'd ever expect to see. Not only has he written a book of poetry, it's really, really good poetry, and you'd expect to see him in greasy coveralls working on a race car or on a semi.
Hey, you know what they say, Lance? You can't judge a book by its cover. Be careful out there. And you, my Page Publishing Book Club faithful, keep coming back for more stories, more inspiration, more fun on the Page Publishing Book Club. Same time next week, same place, 710 WOR. Have a great weekend.